Reverb is an effect that creates artificial space by controlling the amount of echoes or reverberations you hear after a sound is played. It's the difference between this and this. Now, with most reverbs, you're going to have three main controls that are pretty universal across the board. They're going to be size, decay, and pre-delay. Now, size changes the perceived size of the reverb. You'll typically see a few different kinds of these called hall, room, spring, and plate reverb. You'll also see some other variations like stadium, cave, and even bathroom. Now, these are designed to sound like you placed your instrument inside of this kind of room, so you get a sound that's going to sound more or less like the actual room itself. So the size you can actually control with most of these. You can have it anywhere down to like a small kind of bedroom or garage sound, or you can really crank it up to something like a stadium or a large cave or anything like that. Next is going to be the decay parameter. Now, the decay time is just how long it takes for that reverb to fade out. You also hear this called a reverb tail as well, because it's basically just a tail that's added on to the audio. So with decay times, you can have a short decay time, and that'll usually provide enough space for the reverb to get out of the way before the next note comes in, so it doesn't really interfere with your mix. Or you can also have a really longer decay time, and that way it'll fill up some space in your mix if you don't have a lot of instrumentation going on or just something is calling for that. Third, you're going to see pre-delay. Now, pre-delay is just the time that it takes from the point where the initial sound is played to the point where the reverb comes in. So usually you're going to have that pretty short because you want the reverb to sound somewhat natural when it's going to play exactly after your sound plays. And then if we move this all the way up, we hear a delay between those. So it's a little different effect. Most of the time you're going to have a shorter pre-delay, but you can use a long one for some pretty cool effects. Next, we'll take a look at some of the other parameters that you'll see across many reverb units, the first of which is going to be your EQ, or equalization. Many reverb units provide an EQ or a tone control, or even a low cut or a high cut. This allows you to fine-tune the overall tone of the reverb so that it doesn't get too harsh in your mix. You'll also see the density, and that just controls how much or how thick the reverb is going to sound to the ear. And then also some reverbs allow you to control the reflections, which is just the amount of reflections that you hear as soon as that reverb comes in. Now we're going to listen to a few of these different types of reverbs so you can hear what they sound like on instruments and vocals. So first off, we'll play a vocal here. Now with vocals, you can usually get away with a little longer decay time provided that the reverb is a little lower in the mix and it really helps to thicken out the vocal.
I've exposed your lies, baby. The underneath's no big surprise. Now it's time for changing.
Or you can have it just a real slight effect on there as well. With this, you can go anywhere on the size control. Usually you'd want to keep it somewhere in the middle or more. You can really crank these parameters up for a pretty cool effect. Now with drums, you're usually going to want kind of a medium-sized reverb with a shorter decay time to help the drum sound a bit more natural in there. Usually anywhere from about 1 to 2 seconds is a pretty good time on the decay. And then you can go from a small to a medium-sized room, depending on how big you want the drums to sound. Finally, with guitar, you can go with a longer decay time to really have the notes hang out after they've been played, especially if you're playing very few notes. So again, it's a pretty long decay time, just kind of an average size reverb on there. And if you're doing something that has a few more notes in it, you can go ahead and engage the high cut filter, and that's going to take a little bit more of the treble frequencies out of the reverb, so your notes are a little more free to not interfere with each other. For something like this as well, you may want to dial back the decay time a little bit more, so the reverb tail is going to end before the next note comes on. Well, that about covers it for the basics of reverbs. Now you should know enough about it to go ahead and start experimenting on your own.